All right, so I have here some clay, and I've pretty much wedged it. It's not amazingly wedged, but for practice, that's not a big deal. I don't actually need this much, so I could cut with my handy dental floss wire, or I could just tear with my hands. And you just want for your tests a small amount of clay for each one. So I could start with just a small ball and just sort of like flatten it with the heel of my hand. So what that looks like from the side would be, if this was the table, just pressing it down. I'm not looking for anything super uniform because I am just practicing, but you want to aim for about the same thickness as your project, so you get an idea of like how much clay you have to dig away. So kind of keep that in mind. So now if I have this, then I have something I can test my designs on. I would suggest just testing your tools out, and you could even just do this on a chunk of clay, because what kind of marks do they make? You know, when you're new, you don't really know. So let's find out. So we have my needle tool, right? Test out what kind of mark that makes. Do know that if you're working with really wet clay, it is going to make a different mark. So just kind of keep this in mind. You might want to try this out with some clay that you've let dry just a little bit. The back of your tool can also make marks, right? This tool can make marks either just by impressing or carving, which is what it's usually intended for. You know, the back of a paintbrush works similarly to the needle tool, but it's going to be a little bit different. Your paddle could even be used for texture, the side of it, right? So give yourself some time to experiment and play a little bit to get an initial idea of what you have kind of as an option on the table, and then you can get to these pieces. So ideally, if you're thinking about applying texture to an actual project, you kind of want to test it out on clay that's the same dampness. So if you are going to add texture to something really wet, start with your clay really wet. If you're going to add texture to something that's leather hard, then you might need to let these dry out a little bit. But for our purposes, we're just getting our toes wet, so don't worry about damp or dryness of clay. So there's two ways to add texture. There is to sort of draw or carve in, and anytime you're carving, you're making an indentation or taking away. This is called subtractive because I literally have subtracted some of the clay. Another technique would be called additive. So I could take some clay and add it onto this, right? Now, of course, if I just smush this on here, it might look attached now. If I let it dry, it will, I can guarantee, pop off. You have to score it on. So even something really little. Now, again, if I'm just testing this out and I'm going to put this back in the bag when I'm done with it, then I'm actually not going to worry about scoring it on. But it's really important to note that for anything you want to permanently be attached, you need to score it on. Even if it's a bunch of teeny tiny little things, that's important. So I can play around with, well, let's see, maybe I want to think about this design. Do I want this to be sticking up, in which case I'm adding clay to give that shape, or do I want it to be inset, in which case I'm subtracting? And so maybe I should try both, right? So I will smooth this. And your inspiration can be really random. This was literally a pile of cables that we clearly did not clean up very well. So I could get my clay here, and I might want to sketch out generally where my shapes are going to go first. And I like to do this with my needle tool because if I mess up, I can just go back and smooth it. I like to do this on my practice piece and also my full piece. I'm not going to recreate my total design because, again, this is just to practice. If I want it to stick up, I might think about making what's called a coil, which is this. It's kind of like a little snake of clay. They can be big or small. For this one, I would want them kind of small. So I would take some clay like this, kind of roll it out either in my hand or on the mat. And knowing that if I decide to do this for real, I would score it on, but for practice, I could just place it on and just get an idea of, well, how does this look if it sticks up, right? And I could just keep going with that. And also, do I want them all to stick up, or maybe I want to play around with my illusion of space and I leave some of them that are sitting, it makes it look like they're sitting behind, right? So I'm forcing some perspective here. Or do I want to carve it? So test tiles don't even have to be all tested even all the way to firing, but they're nice. If I like a design, I might keep this, fire it, and then test out some colors on here. That's for a future project to really think about. But it just gives us some really immediate feedback with very little it's low stakes. It gives us some immediate feedback on results. So you should make some test tiles, testing out two things. One, you should test out at least one or two of your designs. If you're not happy with all of them, or you don't feel like one's going to translate well into this, then just choose one or two, the ones that you like. But also, maybe you just want to do some random ones. So maybe I just want to play around with pattern that my tools can create. So just because we went on a texture inspiration hunt doesn't mean you have to end up using those designs on your project. That's kind of like to prime your ideas and get you looking, right? But if you end up liking something that your tools can do, then by all means, use that instead or in addition to.